Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Bright Spots. I hope you are having a fabulous week. Boy, we sure are having an Indian summer, aren't we? Beautiful weather out there, especially today in the 70s. I know I'm enjoying it. I hope you are too. And I truly hope that you've had a wonderful day and that you are ready for tonight's show. I know some of you were expecting to see Lisa Kassman this evening. Lisa had a last-minute speaking engagement, and she is rescheduled for January 20th, 21. So we are booked out until January 20th, 21. If you are interested in being a guest on Bright Spots, or you know someone who might be, just drop me a line and I will reach out and see if we can't schedule them in 21. So you know how this works, but if you are new to Bright Spots, please leave us a comment down below. Let us know that you're here, where you're tuning in from. If this is your first time joining Bright Spots, we'd love to know how you heard about us, what brought you here. Is it our guest this evening that brought you here, which is great? And maybe someone told you about Bright Spots, and that would be great to know as well. If you're returning and you're one of our regular watchers, please let us know that as well. We love to have you come back week after week for all of our special guests. So drop a line below, and when our guest comes on, please be sure and ask questions or make comments if there are things that you want to know about our guest or about where he's from, what he does. For those of you that don't know, our guest this evening is John Devlin of the Wheeling Symphony. Conductor John Devlin is an energetic force in the classical music world. He is an innovator of concert design, an ardent champion of American music, and a proponent of cross-genre collaborations. The newly appointed music director of the Wheeling Symphony Orchestra, Devlin is only the 9th conductor in its 90-year history to hold that title. And at 33 is one of the nation's youngest music directors to lead a professional symphony orchestra. Ladies and gentlemen, please make welcome to the Bright Spots studio, John Devlin. Welcome, John.
Hi, Lord. Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
It is absolutely great to see you and great to have you on Bright Spots. So you're one of the youngest conductors, or the youngest conductor in the nation, to conduct a professional orchestra. How does that feel?
The job that I have here with the Wheeling Symphony feels like the job of a lifetime, something that you would dream about once you become a conductor. So to be here in this amazing new home with so many people that care deeply about the arts, care deeply about the city of Wheeling, and to feel the inspiration that comes for the orchestra from the combination of those things, it's a wonderful thing to be a part of.
So, John, I understand that there are some transitions happening with the symphony because of the pandemic. You know, just like everybody else, things have had to change a little bit in this new world, and live music has had to change as well. Tell us some of the things that the symphony is doing to kind of still make music available, maybe some of the things you did over the summer, and then we'll talk a little bit about what's coming up.
Sure. So I thought that I had a very strange beginning to my tenure here with the WSO, when for the second half of my first concert, we were at the amphitheater at Ogilvy, and it started to rain, and we had to cancel the last 4 numbers of my first concert. And they said, oh my goodness, that's probably the worst thing that will happen to the arts this year here at Wheeling Symphony Orchestra. Well, we all know what happened come March, and we were 1 day away from a really special concert at the Capitol Theater. So since then, we have had to, just like all of our peers in the industry, adapt. And with music, one of the things that makes live music so special is that interaction, both of the artists and of our sound, with the live audience behind us. So we are one of the industries that relies most on large gatherings, which of course is the exact thing that COVID prevents us from doing. So You read a nice welcome introduction for me today, and you heard in there that I like to be innovative and design new types of concerts. And this gave us an opportunity to do that. And that's the spin we put on it in our office. Okay, we can't be in the Capitol. We can't make music the traditional way, but what are exciting things we can do for our audiences that will fill the void? And as you know, during the pandemic time, and especially if people are quarantined in their homes, we've turned to the arts more than ever. I'm sure we're all reading more books, watching more movies, listening to more music than we ever have. And the Wheeling Symphony certainly wanted to be a part of that. So starting as early April, we designed a series that I participated in called Monday Evenings with the Maestro, where I took in-depth looks at scores to pieces that the Wheeling Symphony was going to perform when we came back. And we did a kind of exploratory journey together through the piece while listening to a recording of it. And that was the first attempt that we had because we figured out the technology. I was ready to go, and we made that happen for people, and we found some great response. But by the second month of that in May, we said we also need to mix in some live music here. So we put a call out to the musicians of the Wheeling Symphony and said, could you virtually create small chamber style music with each other, submit recordings to us, and we will weave together a virtual fundraising concert that could take place to benefit the Wheeling Symphony. And we pulled it off. We were one of the first symphonies to do something like that. And not only was the event a financial success because of the fundraising, but even more so, it felt like the beginning steps of a return to normalcy because we heard music from our musicians right coming into our homes. And it was a very special night. Then, as we approached the fall, we came back and said, okay, a traditional event for us would be to start the season with Music Under the Stars up at the Ogilvy Amphitheater. And even though, for good reasons and safety reasons, we were not able to have an audience there, we partnered with WTRF here locally and streamed that concert via the television into everyone's home. And we also did a simulcast online. That's the first thing of that type we've ever done, but we really enjoyed it and we had a lot of positive response from it. And now we'll talk about coming up. We're in the middle of a new series called Sound Bites, where again, the orchestra's not in the room with everyone, but we're performing live for an audience that's gathered and having an artistic experience together.
So tell us a little bit about Sound Bites and how that is taking place. There's actually a concert this weekend, October the 11th. Tell us a little bit about how that's going to take place, where it's going to take place, and what makes it so special.
Sure. So the easy part of that question is where and when, and it'll be up at the Glesner Auditorium at Ogilvy. And on Sunday, there will be two concerts. If you're more of a brunch fan and like to kind of get things out of the way early and maybe go home and watch some football, there's a 1:30 p.m. concert. And then in the evening, there's a 6:30 concert. At the 1:30 concert, we'll be serving brunch because, of course, you can hear from the name Sound Bites. We're combining food and music. And then as you can see on the screen at 6 p.m. will be a dinner concert. And you asked a little bit more of a difficult question, which is where did the genesis of this idea come from and what can people expect? And this goes all the way back to my time in Washington, D.C., where I lived for 10 years before moving to Hawaii and then eventually to Wheeling. And there, myself, my wife Camille, and two of our colleagues started an organization called Gourmet Symphony, where we paired up with chefs who lived in the Washington, D.C. area, where there was this burgeoning interest in culinary arts, and also chefs who represent different styles of cuisine were moving to Washington, D.C. at that time. And for example, the Michelin Star program came to Washington, D.C. and started giving out awards in the city for the first time. So I love food and drink, and I love the artistic side of what I think chefs do in terms of designing menus, very similar to what conductors do in terms of designing a program of pieces for a concert. And then we're also responsible for the execution and the delivery. So I feel very akin to chefs in that way. So what we do is we take the music that we're going to perform and we have a meeting with a chef and say, how can we pair through some sort of curated event with a 3-course meal? How can it relate to the music in an interesting way? And so for the one that we're going to have this weekend, you can see it's called a European expedition because we're traveling to all different countries throughout Europe. So the chef at Ogilvy, named Thomas Raymond, has prepared for us a meal that will navigate its way through the various countries you see there, and it will be a culinary as well as a musical adventure.
So tell us a little bit about the actual music. Tell us about the Mozart Marriage of Figaro Overture. Why did you choose that piece of music?
Mm-hmm. So for the first concert of this series, which happened last month, I did a good amount of music that would have been new to our audience, including one piece for which it was the world premiere. So no audience had ever heard it before. And I was doing that because this audience is a highly sophisticated one here in Wheeling. And over the time that we spent in quarantine, I did a lot of research into music that I had never heard before, because I wanted to be able to say, I can do a better job at priority number one, which you read in my introduction, which is presenting great American music. And so that concert focused on the music of our country and presented some of the rare gems that I think I found during my explorations as part of the pandemic time that we had to spend in our offices. So for this concert, however, I wanted to provide a contrast. So you'll see a lot of familiar composers and a lot of familiar pieces on the repertoire list. And that's because I also know that sometimes audiences like to hear music that's familiar, that they know already and have an opinion and a connection to, an emotional connection to, a family connection to, a story of when they saw a concert with that music that was at a special time in their life. And I love hearing those stories from our audience. Now, you'll notice that these are familiar orchestral work, so typically played by something like 50 to 80 players. Well, something that's interesting about this is that all 6 of the pieces that you see on your screen right now were arranged for a much smaller sized orchestra by a London-based composer named Ian Farrington, who specializes in taking great masterworks like the ones on the list you see in front of you and making them playable by a very small ensemble. And I will say, previous to the COVID pandemic, he didn't have that much business because very few orchestras perform with 13 or 15 or 17 people. But now, because of the social distancing requirements for the ensemble, that's the maximum number of people that we can have playing together for a concert of this type. And so all of a sudden, his sales have skyrocketed because he writes very high quality arrangements, again, of music you would normally hear played by 5 or 6 times the amount of people will be performing it with this weekend. But I think it will give the audience an interesting way to listen to these familiar works in a new way. And I'm certainly looking forward to experiencing them with our players for the first time.
That's fabulous, John. And so we've heard about what's happening this weekend. You actually answered one of my questions, which was, did you have to reduce the number of players on stage? And that makes perfect sense. So tell us about the November concert. I know that you have another Soundbites coming up in November, and this is that concert.
Correct.
So can you tell us a little bit about this, about the special guests?
I am tremendously excited about this concert because, as you can see on the screen, there is a name of a composer that may be familiar to a lot of the people who attend the symphony frequently, Dmitri Shostakovich, who I actually say is my favorite composer. And then there's a couple of names up there that might be unfamiliar. So Chevalier de Saint-Georges is a very, very interesting figure in classical music history. He was a contemporary of Mozart. So we're talking about someone active in the latter part of the 1700s and the early part of the 1800s. He was based in France, but largely forgotten to history because he was Black. And the curators of the canon of classical music fought actively against the inclusion of his works in the broader sense of how we carry repertoire by programming it for orchestral performances. So I looked at this and said, in light of some of the things that have come to the forefront with Black Lives Matter movement, we wanted to make sure that we were doing a good job in Wheeling, accurately representing the history of our field. And so I commissioned a dear friend of mine named Michael Ellis Ingram, who's a conductor in the very northern part of the country of Germany. And he took a train down to the library in Munich, where several of the pieces that Chevalier de Saint-Georges wrote are stored in manuscript form, so the actual music that he wrote by hand. And Michael has created a new arrangement of this piece that we will give a world premiere of here with, as you mentioned, special guests. Our concertmaster, Rachel Stegeman, will be performing the solo violin part, while the fabulous musicians of the Wheeling Symphony Orchestra play behind her in this really special event. Astor Piazzolla is famous, probably the most famous composer for his writing tangos. And as you can see, it's a global celebration. So we had been to all sorts of places: Russia, France. The Takemitsu I'll talk to you about next is from Japan. And so we thought maybe going down to Argentina would be really fun. So those are three of the pieces on the program. And then the Toru Takemitsu. I think that if I were asked, I would say that the culture of the country of Japan is the culture that I feel most akin to. I love Japanese cinema. I love Japanese food. And recently, I mentioned this earlier, I spent a year living in Hawaii, when I was the music director of the Hawaii Youth Symphony. And that was an amazing experience culturally, musically, and also as far as getting to know music that I had never heard of before. Because I will admit that during my time in the United States mainland studying, I never heard a piece of Japanese music, nor did I encounter much of it in the early stages of my professional career when I was serving as an apprentice conductor. But in Hawaii, about 70% of the population is Japanese, because that's the closest thing you can do to immigrate from Japan to the United States. And there's a mix of cultures there. So many of the different Asian countries are represented. The Pacific Island countries are represented. Of course, everyone speaks English there, but there's a tremendous Asian population. And so I felt it incumbent upon me, as so many of the students that I was teaching were Japanese, to learn more about the Japanese music. And there was a tremendous amount of composers and history that I was delighted to explore. And no surprise to me that, given the affinity I had for other parts of Japanese culture, I also loved the music. And so the two composers that I found that I enjoyed the most, one is named Some Sato. I've done one of his pieces already and would plan to do some here in Wheeling in the future. But this composer, Takemitsu, is the most famous of all Japanese composers. And he has several pieces that orchestras in the United States will frequently play, but he's really one of the only Japanese composers to have that type of distinction. So in this piece, it's only about 12 minutes long, but it's wildly difficult. And it actually references the United States. It's a 3-movement work, and one of them is called Cape Cod, for example. And you have the sense that we're on a chilly winter night, floating above a very still ocean, and there are these wild theatrics that happen, maybe kind of a fantasy vision of what it would look like to see a night sky burst into shooting stars or something like that. That's what the image I have in my mind of this piece. So I look forward to exploring that. And as you could see there, that's where our other two special guests will be joining us. Fran Duffy and Barbara O'Brien are our principal harp and flutist, respectively. And we're very excited to present on this concert 3 of our outstanding principal players from the orchestra in soloistic roles, as well as the full ensemble of the Wheeling Symphony.
That's wonderful, John. You can really tell how passionate you are about the music when you're talking about the different pieces, and that's absolutely wonderful. And I was fortunate to see you conduct your first symphony with Wheeling, your first night with Wheeling, and it was just wonderful to see you up there and see you afterwards engaging with the concert goers. How has the Wheeling community accepted you? What has your experience been since you and your wife relocated here?
Mm-hmm. I got my training in Washington, D.C., a city where there might be 100 conductors living. Went to school there and did my apprenticeships there. And I learned a great deal about what it was like to be a music director. In graduate school, I learned the musical skills necessary. And then at those subsequent jobs, I learned the professional skills that were necessary. You've written that I'm the conductor of the Wheeling Symphony, which is true. But I also have the title of music director. And that has been the thing that has been the shaping influence of the last 2 years of my life, because I moved to Honolulu, where I became a music director. And the music director of the orchestra, the Hawaii Symphony, with a professional orchestra, doesn't live there. She has many other jobs, and she's incredibly famous and one of the most well-respected conductors in the field, but she doesn't live in Hawaii. So I was one of just a couple of people that conduct orchestras that lived in a city of 1 million people. And I had to take on the role of a diplomat, an ambassador, a galvanizer, and a teacher and a leader. And I made a lot of mistakes. I had a lot of things that were successful, but I started to understand what it was like to get to know a city, how you meet the right people, the type of discussions you want to have, and how you explore how the symphony can help others and how other organizations and individuals can help the symphony. So taking that on such a big scale, right? 1 million people live in Hawaii, moving to Wheeling, where there's give or take 27,000 people, I was able to use the skills I had developed, getting to know a much bigger city, and apply them here. And it felt incredibly healthy. And not only because of the skills I had developed, but even more so because of this type of people that live in this city of Wheeling. They are friendly, they are gregarious, they are supportive, they are real. And what I mean by that is, when someone says something to you in a meeting, or when somebody tells you that they're interested in the orchestra and want to help, they really genuinely mean it. There's no lip service. The city's too small. In DC and in Hawaii, there's a lot of niceties that happen. But here, these are the people you live next door to. They're your neighbors. You're going to see them in the store. You're going to see them when you're walking your dog or on your bike ride. And so I felt a trust start to develop. And based on that trust, I started to find out what people were hoping for from the future of the organization. And one of the things that I've been used to is people giving money to orchestras. That's normal. And of course, people do that here. And if you're ready to donate, please do. But in addition to that, people want to help the symphony through what they can offer out of their own talents and services. So for example, for this concert that we just did at Ogilvy, where we streamed it, we had the students from John Marshall High School come up, and their fabulous director for their program, their AV program, Tony, came in and he designed the entire shoot with 8 cameras, and that was gratis. And then we have an incredible sound person that works here and an incredible lighting person that works with the symphony. And they too did what they needed to do as far as the pricing and the cost for us to make it work. Ogilvy is an amazing community partner. They help us in every way, set up, providing venues, and everything that they do is at a cost that's very reasonable for us, and we are appreciative of that. And then, of course, our home at the Capitol. And I'm just mentioning a few of the obvious ones. So when I've had conversations with people and they ask how they can help the symphony, I've been able to really tell the truth about the nuts and bolts of what we do, how we need help, and how we can accomplish our goals. And the city has embraced not only myself, but my wife, Camille, in a really beautiful way. And for that, we will be forever grateful.
Sorry about that. My mic was muted. If you are just joining us, this is Bright Spots, and our guest this evening is John Devlin, the conductor and music director of the Wheeling Symphony Orchestra. And to learn more about the symphony and to support the symphony, please visit wheelingsymphony.org. John, we are really grateful that you were able to join us this evening. And I want to remind folks about the concerts that are coming up this Saturday. October 11th is the European Expedition, right? I did say that correctly. And these are
actually it's a Sunday.
Oh, it's a Sunday. Okay, sorry about that. It's Sunday, October 11th. I should know that. My baby sister's birthday is Saturday. Okay, so October 11th, and there is a 1:30 brunch and a 6:30 dinner concert. So if you're and there are tickets still available, is that correct, John?
There are not too many, but there are still a few left.
And these concerts are taking place at Ogilvy Park's Glessner Auditorium. And in November, on the 8th, a global celebration again at Glessner Auditorium at Ogilvy Park. And I apologize, my dog is barking in the background if you can hear that. This also is a 1:30 and a 6:30 concert. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And this is a Sunday as well?
Yes.
Okay. So Sunday concerts, 1:30 and 6:30, October 11th and November 8th. So folks, get out there and support our local symphony. And we do have a comment from Micah Underwood. She says, it's always delightful to see our principal players in the spotlight. And I agree 100%. It's always good to see the principal players in the spotlight. So, John, what have you found to do in Wheeling? Have you been able to follow some of your passions outside of music? Are there other things that you've got to take advantage of since you've been here? What are some of your favorite things about Wheeling?
Sure. What a good question. So, I mentioned before how much I love food and drink, and there are certainly no shortage of places that, especially pre-pandemic, but a lot of people have been creative during this time that we'd love to go and have a great meal. Starting down that side of town, Sarah's on Main. We love, of course, Good Mansion Wine, Vagabond Kitchen, and we're sad that the Metropolitan closed. We enjoyed that place as well. And then we've also loved going to the Bridge Tavern, which is run by two of our dear friends and right across the street from the Capitol. And then if we're going to get on the road a little bit, we've loved Figueretti's and Avenue Eats. And then we've made a trip or two up to Pittsburgh and had some great meals there. So that's been really fun. One of the other things that I love about the city is the beautiful trail system. I'm a biker, and so every morning I go out on the bike and get to ride up and down the Ohio River. That's so beautiful. And our dog Aria loves getting down to Heritage Port, and she often runs into a couple of friends down there and the amazing Fitzsimmons family dog park up the road. And then, we've loved going up to Ogilvy and hiking in those trails. We just did that this weekend, brought the dog, and that was really beautiful. And so there's so much to do here. I'm from New York. Yeah, New York sports fan. So sorry to the Pittsburgh fans and the West Virginia University fans. I have to stay with my hometown allegiances, but it's been nice to get sports back and have some friendly conversations about that too.
Absolutely. So does your wife work?
Yes, she does. And in fact, she's far more successful than I am. She and smarter. She is a arts professional, but is on the administrative side of things. She does freelance communication and PR. And she's worked at places like the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C. But since we've moved to Hawaii and now here, one of the things that she's done is maintain a relationship with her former employers. And now she acts as a consultant. Her favorite previous employer, some clients right now, such as the Silk Road Ensemble, which is a new thing in her portfolio that's going really well, as well as some agencies that represent the New York and DC areas. And she works with some of the foremost institutions and orchestras in those areas as well.
Well, that's fabulous. That's wonderful. Well, welcome to the Ohio Valley. I actually live on the Ohio side, up the river a piece, but we spend a good bit of time in Wheeling, obviously because our daughter and her husband live down there. So can't wait to see the upcoming concerts. So the Valley is used to seeing symphony on ice. What is the symphony thinking about doing for the holiday season?
Yeah, so we have a plan. And I was on the phone just before this interview with the boss over down at the office. And he said to me, you can't say exactly what it is yet because we're still navigating a few things. But unless something changes dramatically, we will have a really big celebratory concert event that happens in December that takes the place of our traditional symphony on ice. And we're hoping to beam that right into people's homes so that they can celebrate with their families. So again, just like we've been doing since March 13th hit and we couldn't do a regular business with the symphony, we're thinking of new and creative ways to make sure that music is still present in everyone's lives during the pandemic. And this holiday celebration will not be the first time we let you down.
That's really good news. I don't know if you know that I sing as well. I sing with two other women called the Honky Tonk Sweethearts. Bet you can't guess what kind of music we sing. But we traditionally do a Christmas concert as well, and we're looking at taking ours virtual
Perfect.
as well, so that we still get a chance to perform the Christmas season for our fans. It's difficult to do a virtual concert because you, as a musician and as a conductor, I'm sure you know, you do feed off of the audience and the reactions, and that really helps the energy on stage. And without that, it's a little difficult. It is a little difficult. I've watched a few virtual concerts online, and even the big names, you can see that they kind of struggle as well. It's just a tough. It's different looking into a camera.
Yes.
As opposed to looking into the eyes of folks. So, well, folks, if you have questions about the Wheeling Symphony, or you would like to support the symphony or attend a concert, please visit wheelingsymphony.org. And to find out more about John Devlin, he has a Facebook page, John Devlin. Please go like his page. Great information on there. And is there anything else that you would like to share, John, that we haven't covered?
You know what? I think we've done a really nice job at covering so many of the important and salient topics right now for the orchestra, and you've done a really thoughtful job at exploring my relationship with the community. I would just say that in addition to the December plans that you can count on coming out of our office and into your home, there are going to be concerts that happen in one way, shape, or form this spring as well, starting in January. We were so excited when earlier this week the governor's new guidelines allowed finally for musicians to assemble inside as long as there's no audience, which means we can put a camera on anything we want to do. And so we've already had a meeting with the team to sit down and plan out what that's going to look like. And the other thing I have to say is that never before in my life have I had 6 months off from conducting. So my brain went a little wild with the planning for once we come back from COVID times and things are normal. The Wheeling Symphony Orchestra is going to continue to make a really big splash, and we already have some plans for as far away as 3 years from now, because sometimes it takes that long to create really good art.
So how do you decide what music the symphony is going to perform?
Yeah, you know, I've worked at orchestras that have 40 classical concerts a year. We have 4. Our job is entirely different, because we can't do deep explorations of all the works by this composer and this esoteric thing over here and this mid-level work that you might never have heard from this famous composer that we just thought it'd be interesting to throw on there. I have to create priorities because I can only program 4 concerts of 80 minutes of music each on the classical program season. So I had to establish for myself priorities that felt true to who I am as an artist. State those out loud very early on in the process where they were hiring a music director, so that if chosen, I would know that the values of the organization align with my personal values. And that's what we found here. So I have talked about 3 things that guide the way that I program. The first being finding new, exciting voices that are American composers, many of them young, many of them living, and also for sure many different backgrounds, because that is what makes America great. And I support American artists in different ways, sometimes by commissioning their works, sometimes by performing their works, and in other ways bringing them in as thought partners around concert experience. The second priority we have is to be innovative with concert design. I mentioned the Gourmet Symphony event, but it wasn't just that we paired food and music. That's been done before. We also ingrained into our concert experience many different nuanced innovations that we thought added up piece by piece to an entirely different feeling of a concert. For example, the orchestra sat in the middle of a room and the audience was placed 360 degrees around. So if you like to sit in front of the orchestra like at a normal concert hall, great. But have you ever seen a conductor from the front? That could be interesting one time, right? So people to choose those seats, or to be, if they played the bass in college, they could sit right behind the bass section and see what that felt like again. And that was an innovation. We only programmed 45 minutes of music for a 3-hour concert. Why? To give people a chance to interact in between pieces. I mean, I'm sure you feel the same way. I mean, we love going out to eat with our friends and family. So we can just steal that and give that to people for 60% of the night, they'll love it. They talk, and then every so often for 20 minutes, you turn to your right and see a professional orchestra perform. And then how about one more? We left a seat open at every table. And in between pieces, the musicians would come and sit at a table and dine with you.
Wow.
I mean, so we tried to, there were many more, but we tried to take things like that and say, ask the question, why does every classical music concert feel the same to attend? Are some of those rules good? Yes. Like the audience shouldn't talk while the piece is happening, that type of thing. But everything else is up for grabs. And so we put it up for grabs and we picked the things we thought might be fun to do, and it added up to a great thing. So that's priority number 2, is we're going to innovate here with the type of concerts we have. And so far, the way that I've lived this out in Wheeling is that every one of our Masterworks concerts has had a surprise element. So for the season opening concert, we commissioned a pair of tango dancers to come in and dance. The lights went off, and we didn't tell anybody it was happening in advance. You're smiling. Were you there?
It was wonderful.
Okay. Yeah. And let me ask you this question then. Was it more impactful for you because you didn't know what was about to happen?
Yes, absolutely. It was definitely more impactful because I didn't know it was going to happen. I knew there was a surprise because I believe you all had marketed that in advance. And actually, the company that I work for sponsored the concert. So we knew there was going to be a surprise. But I didn't know what the surprise was going to be. So when it did happen, yes. And I love ballroom dancing. So seeing the dancers, it was beautiful, absolutely beautiful.
Yeah. And so Wheeling, we're a small orchestra. Our budget is under $2 million. We can't do too much in terms of expenditure. But it didn't cost that much money to call these friendly people up in Pittsburgh, had a couple meetings with them. They came to the rehearsals. What a great thing. What a great thing. And then for the next concert, we put chairs on stage. Because remember, I mentioned with the Wheeling Symphony, why not give people the option of a different seat if we have the room on the stage? So we did that, and we didn't charge people an arm and a leg for it. We invited people to the stage for free as a surprise that night. So 50 people walked in with no idea that was going to feel different than any experience they'd ever had in the hall. And then they were there. And like the principal timpanist of the youth orchestra sat next to the person that plays timpani in the Wheeling Symphony, and several people who were on our first. And so some people said to me, I'll never miss another concert because they felt treated so specially that night. And so maybe only 50 people had that experience, but you can also bet that the people in the audience are looking up there with a little envy saying, what's that?
Sure. Okay, so I think we're having some technical difficulties on your side, John.
Okay, am I back?
You're back now, yes.
Okay, great. Sorry, I'm not sure what happened. I had a blip in the Wi-Fi, I think.
That's okay. That's okay. So that's all great stuff. And I know that you have some surprises in store for folks to look forward to for upcoming concerts. And I can't wait to be in the audience again and come see one of the concerts, and you can count on it. So again, thank you so much. For those of you that don't know, John came on last minute. He got a call on Monday, or at least someone at the symphony got a call on Monday and said, "Can John do Bright Spots on Wednesday?" And he was gracious enough to come on. And it's a concert week, and I understand you don't typically do these kind of things on a concert week. So we so appreciate you coming on, talking about the symphony, what's going on, and we wish you the very best of success here in Wheeling and wherever your career takes you. We hope you stay in Wheeling a very long time. It's wonderful to have you.
Thank you so much for inviting me, and it was my pleasure to be here.
All right. Folks, thank you for tuning in this evening for Bright Spots, and I invite you back again next week for another episode. Our guest next week is Tracy Amon. She is a social media strategist from British Columbia. I hope you will tune in. Thank you. God bless you. Keep shining your light and be a bright spot in someone else's world.